YouTube
Here
page
we
and
are.
see.
We are live. Welcome, everybody, to the August edition of Latinas Chat Media, the brunch edition. We are super excited about these two topics that we are taking on today. And God knows there was a lot of things we could talk about today because there's just been so much going on with Nate Parker and the Olympics and Ryan Lochte, who is now all of a sudden part Cuban American, and people wanting to use that to ignore his white privilege. But we're not going to talk about that today. We got enough to talk about in terms of the Getdown and the controversial YA novel that was just pulled called When We Were Fierce. We're really trying to keep this to just an hour, so we're going to dive right in. I want to welcome and acknowledge my co-panelists, J.F. Siri, Linda Nieves-Pal, and Maria Nieto, and we're going to dive right into the Getdown. And before we do, I want to let y'all know that among the four of us, we make 2.5 Puerto Ricans, so 2.5 New Yorkers who are all old enough to have grown up along with hip-hop. So we definitely have very strong feelings and reactions about the Getdown. And why don't we start with you, Linda, because you're the one that saw all of them so far, so, and are really passionate about it.
You know, you go into watching these things hoping and praying that they get it right. And I've read a lot, and it's funny. I hate when I love a show and the internet doesn't, or they find a million things wrong with it, because it may not be perfect, and you have to accept it for what it is. And there is a lot of brilliance here, but I absolutely loved the show. I loved it because, first, I thought they got the characters right, with the exception of, Giancarlo Esposito was the only actor I felt that didn't read believable. And you took, that one character, they could have just brought in someone. It would have been perfect, because the cast, to me, is everything in this series. The cast is everything. I fell in love with the soundtrack. I fell in love with the story. I fell in love with the visuals. I do like that it's a mishmash of things, and that it's not too grounded or too real. I think when you go real with stuff like this, there's a lot more that can go wrong. So it's an art piece. It's a beautiful, crazy piece of art, and I wouldn't change anything except for Giancarlo Esposito. But Shameik Moore, hello, he was my favorite, I think. And the lead, I forgot her name. I can't pronounce her first name. She's
Hetty
Cuban. She's Cuban and Jamaican. And I just thought she was fabulous. The performances were almost perfect. I didn't find anything fake. Every now and then, and when I speak Spanish, I speak the way they did. So it was like, whatever, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it from beginning to end. My favorite episodes. It took me a little bit to get into the pilot. In the middle of the pilot, I started really just loving it. And then my favorite episodes were 3 and 5. For anybody that watched it, but yeah, I highly recommend it, and I, for one, think it's going to be classic.
I think so. Siri.
Okay, so I've only seen the first 2 episodes, and I must admit, I had mixed feelings in the first one. Knowing Baz Luhrmann's work the way that I know it, I should have expected certain things. And I didn't. I thought it was going to take for some reason, I don't know, in my mind, I thought it was going to take a more like straight and narrow sort of path to the storytelling. And and the whole time I'm like wrestling with that. I'm like, but this is so Baz Luhrmann. But I don't know if I want to see the story told this way. But this is so Baz Luhrmann, So, so I totally struggled with those things. One thing that I am growing to love are the Jimmy Smits character, Francisco Cruz, and Cadillac. They're so big.
Yeah.
They're so big. I mean, and then it's so interesting because you know, they're so big in comparison to many of the characters that they're sort of talking to always or dealing with. And you know, it's funny, I was watching the show with my friend, and I'm going to put her on the spot. But, you know, one of the things that she was saying is that he looks like he's having so much fun with this character, you know, and I think that's really, really nice to see. I completely echo Linda's point about Giancarlo Esposito. He's so, he's worked so much, and I've seen him in so many different roles, and I'm almost a little disappointed that you know, I don't know, his character isn't working for me, or him in that role isn't working for me. One thing that I absolutely love is the ethnic diversity of the cast, of even the Latino makeup that you're seeing, you know, these Puerto Rican families where there are African Americans that are part of the family, or that they are Afro-Latinos, and, you know, I like seeing that, because for me, that's what my family looked like, you know, and so it's nice to see that. One interesting thing, though, that I wanted to bring up, because we were talking about the writers outside of this conversation, is that in the article where Stephen Aldi Gergis, I think it's decided, pronounce or discusses the writers, he says, when we started working on the project, I was really interested in learning all of the writers' personal stories. I found that the more I could learn about the people who were going to be creating the series, the more it's going to unfold itself into the show. If you're writing well, you're writing from a personal place. So we've been talking a lot about writers of color, writers not of color writing stories about people of color, and I know, you know, and so I was kind of like, okay, so you invested sort of like all this time in wanting to know your writers, but do your writers reflect the stories that they're telling? I don't know, because I haven't looked up all of the writers yet, but I know that was something that we were talking about, and so when I read that in the article, it immediately stood out to me, because I think it's a wonderful sentiment, right? Yes, they're writing, and obviously you're always going to inject personal views or personal experiences into the writing that's happening, but if these writers, not that they have to be of the time period, but even reflecting the community that they're writing about, you know, it makes me wonder now, or sort of like have more questions about that. So I wanted to throw that out to you ladies, because I think, Sophia, you did start to look up who some of the writers on the show were. And, you know, if you have all white writers and you're invested in their, you know, stories, how does that then read in terms of telling these stories of Black and brown people, you know, in the South Bronx in the 1970s? I don't know.
So before we get to that, because that's a really wonderful question, Siri, so thank you for posing that. Just a quick overview of my immediate reactions to the show. I'm only about 3 or 4 episodes in. I really do appreciate this show. This is a show that if it were on DVD, I would buy and want to have to my collection to own for myself. I, as a Bronx-born New Yorican who is going to be 47 in a couple of weeks, I am very, very territorial and protective about the way the Bronx that I grew up in is depicted, and very criticona about that. And like Linda, so I come in very like, okay, all right, I'm going to watch it. I'm not going to critique something I haven't engaged, which will come up later when we come to this book. But but I want to be open, and I want them to get it right. I really do believe that this team gets a lot more right than they don't. You cannot walk into a Baz Luhrmann vehicle and expect the Warriors. I think anybody who expected that, nobody sold you that. So I don't know why you expected that. So nobody sold you that. If they told you that and then you got something different, then I understand why you'll be disappointed. Some of the critiques, I have to say, especially critiques around it being soft or corny, I really do believe, I have a problem with that, because there's just this notion that because it was the Bronx is Burning Bronx, that there was never any vibrancy, that there was never any joy, that there was never any pleasure. And if you really do understand the early days of hip-hop, a lot of the initial records were party records, because that's what people were seeking to escape from the oppression. And so that is a vital part of the hip hop history. And so I definitely wonder, especially since a lot of the critique around it being corny or it being soft comes from men, what I'm wondering is how much are you invested in the toxic masculinity that often gets conflated with hip hop? I particularly love, in terms of story and in performance, the vulnerability that the young men in this cast display. There is a range of emotions in this story. They are not afraid to cry when they are hurt and heartbroken. You got to remember that these characters are supposed to be young. They're supposed to be kind of like in their late teens. So when people kind of get mad at them for not being super hard all the time, I'm just kind of like, you need to check what kind of visions of masculinity, especially as it relates to hip hop, what you're thinking is authentic hip hop, what kind of visions of masculinity you're depicted in. So you're invested in. So that said, I think this cast is practically flawless. I like Giancarlo Esposito. I like seeing him work. I used to be on the community funding board of the North Star Fund, and he was one of our hosts for one of our fundraisers, so I know that he's a progressive brother. So I'm always down for when talented people are also about the community, wanting to see them work and see them win. So I'm going to forgive his performance in this piece. The tone is off. There are times
all over the place.
The tone is not consistent, but again, because this cast is so strong, that I can rock with it. I really like that, and because it's trying to be true to the grit, but still show the vibrancy, the agency, the creativity. That's kind of hard to nail. That's kind of hard to nail. And I think the biggest challenge for me, I really appreciate the show. I'm going to say one more thing to give Maria a chance to jump in. I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm almost afraid to say it because I'm afraid, I don't know what kind of door it's going to open. But I do feel that, to be honest, I have to say this. Two things. One is that, a lot of the people who are the major creative forces behind this show are not Latino. And yet I feel the love for us in this show.
And I think that has to do with the playwright. I really do.
I feel that. Yeah, I feel the love for it. Doesn't come off as fetishizing us. It doesn't come off as exoticizing us. It's like the people behind the show honor Latino contributions to the creation of hip hop, honor the culture, honor the struggle. And it's depicted here. Does it get everything right? No. But I feel the love here. And the reason why I was afraid to say that is because there are people out there that talk about how much they love us and want to tell our stories and then don't nail it. And I'm kind of afraid to say this is going to give people permission to go and do this and fuck it up. But I have to be honest. I feel honored as a Nuyorican by this show, by the depiction of the culture, by the racial diversity of the cast, by giving name to some, the cast, the characters speaking to the oppression sometimes, being aware of that, and their agency. So I really appreciate it. I think they get a lot more right than they get wrong. What this is challenging for me is that I know that there are equally talented Latinos who have been wanting to tell this type of story forever. And why have we not been getting the chance to do that? I feel the same way I felt in the early 2000s when there was this spate of independent Latino films that really were on point, like Raising Victor Vargas and Maria Full of Grace, that were not created by Latinos, but were depicting our communities better than we were. And so and yet I know that there's people in our community who can depict us with this level of sophistication and respect for craft and for love of the community. And why are we not getting that chance? So we can talk about more of that. And yet, I'm not going to hate on somebody on a product that, for the most part, is getting it right. So, Maria.
It's funny because I think the first thing that I have to say is to be, transparency. I am Colombian from the Queens, and I didn't have that experience at all. So I'm really looking at it as an outsider.
But that's why it's important. Your reaction is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm kind of really looking at it from an entertainment point of view and how and as a piece of work, as a piece of art. I love the magical realism. The whole Shaolin thing with Kung Fu. I love it. I love seeing all black and brown casts because all of a sudden then it's not about the depiction, it's about the emotion, it's about what they're going through, it's about the storyline, and it's fucking refreshing. Because I'm not caught up in like, oh, are they being, what's their tiny little role that they have, this one little chance that they have to like give the full range of humanity. I'm not worried about it. You know what? Because the entire storyline is about them. So for me, that's amazing. I think the cast is incredible. The guy that plays Ezekiel he's gonna rocket to the stardom, and he should because he's incredible. You're right about Giancarlo Esposito. I don't know what he was going for. The accent was all over the place. I don't know. He was trying too hard to play, in my opinion, Puerto Rican, and that's problematic. And that's the other thing too. It wasn't coming from a place of real emotion. It's funny because I saw Sonia's comment about Jimmy Smits playing the sexy dirtbag. So hot. I'm falling in love with that man all over again.
Yeah, he's great.
He's amazing. He's incredible in it. And it's funny because I think he's only half Puerto Rican. But this is the most Latino that I've ever seen, and I was worried about that. I was worried that he was going to go, a little too over the top. He nailed it. He's incredible. But yeah, for me, it's funny because seeing the storyline coming. In other words, seeing, for example, all the oppression that I wasn't really aware of. It's also like, and I'm far removed from it. I was never really into the scene, and I'm far removed from it to the point where now it's iconic. Like I buy T-shirts for my brother-in-law that has pictures from that era. It's called Shopping for Wayfarers, and so it's so iconic now that it's like, oh wow, look, we're revisiting history. But then actually seeing it and seeing the moments and seeing the rubble, the burning, and then I understand why you would loot. Like, I get it now. Well, shit, if this is your day-to-day life, and all of a sudden it's like, I can get what's mine, I understand it now. It comes from a different place. The Little Warriors clan is amazing. I don't even know if that's for real. That's terrifying when those kids popped up out of the rubble.
Well, that's one issue that I do have with the show. I do too. You go ahead, Maria.
No, go ahead, because I'm actually asking the question. I didn't know if that was actually true. That whole scene cinematically was great when the kids are in the middle of the rubble and then all of a sudden the little warrior kids pop up. I was like, oh shit! Like you're cornered, and you felt viscerally like it really is a jungle out there. And
I don't know what. I'm sorry, I didn't
no, I don't know. Like it's that a moment of like. You didn't see the lions in the foliage, and now they're on you, and you're like, oh.
Well, the Savage Skulls were a real gang at that time. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be the Savage Skulls.
Well, there were multiple gangs in the Bronx and throughout New York City at that time. And one of the critiques that I do have of the Getdown is they come off a little bit cartoonish when that was a very serious issue at that time. And I'm hoping that in future episodes, as they are producing the next 6, that they go a little bit deeper with the gang and complicate that a little bit more. For those who have not seen the documentary Rubble Kings, you should check that out. Because one thing, because it isn't just backdrop. It is actually, the gang culture is actually essential to the history of hip-hop. Because one thing that people don't understand is that, and the documentary Rubble Kings does this really, really well, is how the gangs, with no help from the police, fostered their own truces. And through that fostering of those truces, that was a pivotal moment in actually the evolution of what we call hip-hop culture. So that is, it's actually, it's not just backdrop, it's not just social political context, it's actually part of the artistic cultural history of hip-hop and this is the relationship, and I think it's important to tell that story, especially in a fictionalized form, because how many people do watch documentaries, right? So I really do hope the creators incorporate that, complicate that, because it is actually really important to understanding where hip-hop came from, because it was people making solutions to their own problems at the grassroots level that gave rise to hip-hop subculture. And I think, and that again, and that is the story of resilience, and that is the story of creative resistance that the larger audience needs to know, especially people who love hip-hop today, because there is still an ongoing conflation with hip-hop with gang culture, like they are one and the same. But people have to understand that, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, neutrally, let me say, that gang culture did have a role in the creation of hip-hop, but it's a lot more affirming than people realize. So there's a lot about hip-hop is keeping it real, is because it's gritty, because it's gully, because it's grimy, and it's all about do what you need to do to survive. And I'm like, but it's much more complicated than that. It's much more beautiful than that. And I just love the cross-racial. This is also a very New York story, because what makes New York City very different from a lot of major cities in the United States has been that solidarity, and what comes from that solidarity politically, economically, culturally, when Latinos and African Americans and other people come together to create something. And so this is an American story. This should not be treated as niche. And one of the things, this is an American story. This is part and parcel of what it means. And, you know, this is the best of the American mythology made real. And so everybody who cares about knowing the history of their country and whatever should be watching this, and not take everything as historical accuracy, but really just look into the emotional truth of it. One last thing I'm going to say, and then Maria Linda, I know you've been holding on, is that what I hope that this will do, and this is a big hope given what this, you know, given this one project, is that it does open the doors for people of color of that time to tell, because there's multiple stories here. Like, I would love to see a story, a movie, a TV series about women in hip hop at this time, and how putting a gender lens on how, you know, how we contributed and came up with this. And then the other, I hope that this ushers back the good old days of when you could cast unknowns because they were right for the part, and get away from this, gotta be A-list to do something that's independent and great. I hope that this ushers back a willingness of the folks with the money to invest in projects that have stars that are still unknowns, because this shit works with these unknowns. And I hope that we get that again. I hope that this opens up more doors for people to being able to cast people who are right for the role, whether or not they're already known entities, because that's what people of color need in order for us to have more opportunities to tell our stories and to tell them well. We can't keep banking on people who are A-list and entities to tell our stories well, because putting J-Lo in something doesn't necessarily make it right just because she's so visible and successful. So.
That's right. Well, I would love to talk a little bit about what you brought up, was why is it that this team of non-Latinos can do it and we're not doing it? Mind you, this was a huge budget too. I think this was the
like $120 million, $120 million on the entire series.
And they're not going to give that money to just anyone.
Right.
Least of all us.
Right.
So I think I saw the list of writers, and I didn't see. I'm assuming I don't think there were any Latinos, or maybe there was one. I
saw one Latina woman's name, Jackie Rivera.
Yes.
That I remember.
I don't know how much input they had, but I would love to talk about why is it, or how are we going to move our product in and have somebody believe in us in that same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to talk. I don't want to get into the whole, well, maybe it's not up to par argument. Because listen, there's a lot of brilliant Latinos out there doing brilliant stuff.
That's an excuse, right? Exactly.
And just like these unknown actors, we didn't have any idea they existed. They did a phenomenal job. So, what is happening? That you're right. There were probably 10 other people that had this same story, like shit now, because they didn't get to tell it their way. I don't know. What do you think?
One of the reasons that I've thought of this for a while, and I maintain it, is because I think there is some kind of assumption that when someone outside of a smaller community, a marginalized community, sees the universality of our stories, then the industry says, oh, well, if a white person, let me just make a concrete, if a white person can look at this Puerto Rican story and see the universality of it, then there must be something here, because why is this white person interested in this story? Why is this white person interested in this African American story? Why is this, I think that's what happens when we want to tell our own stories. The assumption is that we're niche, that we can only speak to our own people, that we cannot. If I as a Latina want to tell a story that centers Latinas, then I'm only speaking to Latinas, and that nobody outside the Latina community is going to understand what it is I'm doing. But there's an assumption that white folks, it's a centering them again and privileging their point of view, that if white folks can see the humanity in people of color stories, that they also can tell those stories well. And so it definitely, that's what I think is going on. Again, it's another form of like colonialization. When we say this is an important story, it's not, and we're telling our own story, it's not valued. We need a white person to validate the story. Oh, this might be about Puerto Ricans and African Americans, but there's some universal human thing here. We should tell it. And they go, oh, okay. Why don't you tell that, since you're the one who saw it? So there's an unwillingness to trust us with our own damn stories. And we want to tell our own stories. Then all of a sudden they think the story is small. And the story is not human, that it's this small niche project. That's been my theory for a minute. And I still feel that that's, I'm not saying it's the only thing at play, but I think that's a big part of it. What do you guys think?
I also think that to a certain extent the industry itself is non-people of color. It's very white. So there's a sense that there are certain arbiters of taste, what they find engaging, not even relevant, to be honest with you, but engaging. Like, oh, that's a great story to tell. And so, if Stephen Aldergurgis hadn't won a Pulitzer, if he was still writing plays, I'm not even sure that he would have really been tapped to tell that story. Baz Luhrmann, of course, obviously is. He's somebody who can see the mythology, and he was trusted with creating the visuals for that mythology. But I do also think it's about getting through the industry hierarchy enough to be trusted as an arbiter of taste. And I think it really just expounds on your general point about validation, white validation. But I'm honing in more on the artistic understanding of taste, like who's a tastemaker, who's an influencer. And they're trusted to say, yeah, what I think is great is going to translate to millions in a way that I don't know that we are.
Let me pause for a second here, just because I want to make sure that we don't erase the African American folks who are behind this project as well, because it's easy to look at Baz Luhrmann and Gurgis and also Seth, Rosenfeld as the big creators, but there's a Grandmaster Flash is very much involved in this project. Nelson George who's a hip hop historian, is very much involved in this project, and
Nas.
and Nas is, you know, is a big part of. So there are people who were there. There are pioneers and trailblazers in the art form who are having major influences in this project, and I don't want to erase them. I want to acknowledge them. So Maria, did you want to add? I mean, not Maria. Linda, did you want to add?
No, it's just so funny. It's always the, you know, the consultants are always the sous chefs to the chef.
Mm-hmm. You just said a word there.
And I find it annoying. This is what it is for now, but
right, because I'm curious. Did Grandmaster Flash and Nas and Nelson George themselves didn't want to be, you know, at the helm of this project? Haven't had ideas about something like this for decades? Again, you cannot tell me that the talent and the innovation and the vision wasn't there among people of color who had the talent, who had the knowledge, who had the insider track to pull, and the credibility in terms of track record and the things that they've done artistically. Because we talk a lot about track record, right? That's what happens a lot. It's like, okay, well, we know Baz Luhrmann has a track record, so this is why he's going to be entrusted with $10 million. Right? You're trying to tell me Grandmaster Flash doesn't have some track record? You're trying to tell me Nas doesn't have some track record? You're trying to tell me Nelson George doesn't have some track record? So what is that about?
I think ideally what we would want to see is someone like Nas, you know, or whomever, Grandmaster Flash, or anyone that knows the story and is part of the story, be the director, be the chef, and then hire someone like, you know, someone else to come in as a consultant. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think if I'm hearing you guys correctly, like, it seems like that's sort of more of what we want to see, right? Why are the people who are part of the industry just a consultant on the project versus them being at the helm of the project, or them investing in someone that, you know, they know can also tell the story of the project, right? Investing in a particular director, or investing in a particular, you know, in a particular script.
This reminds me of Lemonade.
Okay.
Beyonce hired all these amazing filmmakers to tell her story.
Yep.
So it was the group. It's actually a it's a group effort. It's a collaboration.
Yeah.
But when you have someone like Beyonce with that track record, or Baz Luhrmann that have that track record, you know that they're going to get the job done. They have a vision. You know, I love Baz Luhrmann. I mean, Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite movies. I think there aren't too many people that could pull off what he just pulled off, to be honest. Not in this way.
Right.
You know, maybe it would have been too real.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't tell our version of the story. I'm just saying that I'm not going to take anything away from him, because he is brilliant in my eyes.
You know what, Linda? You mentioned on Facebook, which I thought was hilarious, it was a great comment, that he Febrezed the South Bronx.
Yeah.
And you said you would have done it differently because you like it. What was the phrasing you used? Do you remember?
Oh, fabuloso.
Yeah,
I would fabuloso the shit out of that, and he Febrezed it. Yeah.
And so I also think that comes up to, like, the particular lens with which we tell our stories. And how commercial or not commercial is it, you know? And is it only because then the audience is primed for the Febreze? We are a Febreze-ready audience. You know, do we have to kind of like create the fabuloso aesthetic so that it also becomes equally acceptable? I don't know, you know? It's funny because there's a lot of intersection of like market and industry and art and vision and story. And it gets complicated for us for all those reasons. We don't have the same track record across the board that a lot of the white directors do. You know, and then there's the understanding of like, they would have been like, give it to Cuadron. I'm like, Cuadron can't tell a South Bronx story. Are you kidding? Baz Luhrmann, who understands the mythology, who understands the magical realism, who understands the lens of those kids. Because you know what? Every one of those kids had heroes. And they were mythical heroes in their own right. Everybody fucking forgets that no matter where the fuck you grew up, I'm sorry I'm cursing, no matter where the fuck you grew up, you are on your own hero's journey. Everybody's living their own mythical hero's journey. It's just that nobody ever looks at us and says, oh my God, that's an individual hero living their own individual epic fucking, you know, Gilgamesh, for God's sakes. Luhrmann stepped in and he goes, I see it. I see you there. And then and I think even a lot of the people from our own community are guilty of it. They also kind of fetishize it, which is going to jump into when we was fierce. You know, they still see it as like it could have gone very easily into poverty porn in the wrong hands.
Yeah. Right.
Totally.
Like one of the things that this that the Getdown reminds me of and has me really curious is like I am thinking about other people and how they might have taken this differently. As much as I feel like they nail a lot, like I'm curious, like what would this been like in Darnell Martin's hands? You know, the writer-director of I Like It Like That. Because that is still a wonderful, universal Bronx story, Bronx set story that really touches on a lot of universal elements. And so I wonder about that. And even though I'm not, I have mixed feelings about him, you know, how would it have been different if a Leon Ichazo had done this? What would have been, I'm just curious. I'm not saying he should have. I'm curious. You know, different people with different aesthetics, you know, different approaches to the story, how it would have come off. And I'm just really hoping that this opens the door for all those different versions of the story, the other aspects of the story. Well, that's what I'm hoping will happen.
Well, the thing is that, you know, when we look at cinema, when we look at literature, there are some stories that get told over and over and over again. They're being just told maybe from a different point of view or from a different maybe it's the same story, but it's set in a different place now. And so I agree with you. And in terms of your hope, I hope that the story becomes important enough that it makes space for other stories similar, set in the same time, or about, you know, sort of sharing similar conflicts, that those stories also get some space to be told, right? Because it's important, and you're right. It is American. As much as you know, some people will look at it and say, oh, this is, you know, it doesn't fit their idea or their mold of what an American story is. But it's a very much an American story in that way. And I think that you know, maybe this will serve as some kind of entry, you know, way, you know, for the story to continue to get told, or like, you know, what was brought up earlier about the story being told about women in hip hop. You know, at that time in the 70s and also on through today. You know, we never see that vantage point of the story. And so if this creates a space for that, then hell yeah.
Well, you know what's funny? I always, if you, when talking about genre, we are really actually talking about the birth of a genre in the United States. The same as jazz was. And look how many stories, you know, once jazz became very, very the kind of thing that nice white people listen to in elevators, oh my God,
but that's not jazz.
That's actually called music.
Yeah, that's not jazz. Let's not perpetuate the myth that that's jazz.
Some people think it's jazz. Some people think it's jazz.
Some people think that's jazz. Some people think Kenny G is jazz, and I don't know.
I know.
It's funny, like, full disclosure, jazz makes my left eye twitch. I freaking hate it. Oh, horrible. But it is also the birth of a genre in the United States. It is a genre.
Yes.
That, you know, it is native to this country. It was born of the influence of this country. It couldn't have been born anywhere else.
Rock and roll is the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And look how many stories have been told around those two genres, jazz and rock. You know.
But a lot of those rock and roll stories erase the black origins of that genre.
Right.
And so hopefully, again, that the Getdown will open the doors for those stories to be told. So I think, you know, we're at 11:39, and I do want to move on to When We Were Fierce, because one of the reasons why these two projects makes sense to talk about. People are thinking, these two very disparate things, why are they talking about this at the same time? Well, because one thing is that they're both projects that where a lot of the creativity came from people outside the community depicted, and for the most part, the Getdown nails it. And when we were fierce, really, really fails. And for those who don't know, and I think it's very important because we're Latinas Chat Media and we talk a lot about TV and movies, but we really need to also be mindful of what's going on in the publishing world and in other art forms. And for those of you who don't know, real quick introduction, When We Were Fierce is a young adult novel that was written by Charlton-Trujillo, who is a self-identified white Mexican. And when the book was put out to the industry reviewers, it got amazing reviews. The story is told about African American teenage, mostly boys, in a gang in Chicago. It's urban realism. It's told in verse fiction. And this got, in advance of its publication, got rave reviews, starred reviews, and then when African American folks who got their hands on advanced copies started to come forward with, this book is highly offensive. This verse fiction, where the author invents a vernacular, is harmful. This hurts. And it's not just the language, it's also the characters. There's a lot of tropes and stereotypes in it, and even just the structure. I think for folks, the really best review of this book that you will find is by Jennifer Baker, who's behind the Minorities in Publishing website and podcast. And what is really powerful about her review is that she really breaks down, like it's a master class in textual analysis, that review, where she takes many examples from the book and also compares them to other books that nailed the language to show us. It teaches you, if you don't know how to read this stuff, it teaches you why the language in this book is really problematic and is really offensive. And so the book, which was supposed to be published in early August, got pulled. They're saying that the author, the agent, and the publishing house want to look at it again. Quite honestly, I don't think that this book can be salvaged. There is so much wrong with what I've seen so far, not having read advanced review copies. I don't think this book can be salvaged. And it's really important for us to have this conversation, especially us as Latinas in this panel, about, well, what happens, we're very strident in calling out when a white person tells a story that censors people of color and gets it wrong. So what happens when it's one of our own? Do we handle it differently? Are we more, sensitive about, well, let's consider someone's intentions? I'm really grappling with that. I'll pause here to let you guys speak, and then I'll come in later at one point, because what I will say right now is that I'm disappointed that the author has not yet come forward to engage the critiques of this book. I do want to honor that this is probably very painful. There's a lot of, there might be a lot of shame there. And I do want to respect, I would much rather she take space and listen and reflect very deeply instead of issuing a defensive faux apology. But I do hope that very soon she comes forward and becomes a part of the conversation around what is done here. I'm going to pause, let you guys speak, and we'll get back into it.
If it's okay, I'll jump in. Well, I think one of the key things that you said is that it's, for me, the fact that people held back critique is part of the reason why so much of our work suffers. we pull our punches. And you know what? Every good artist needs the punches. That's how you get better. And we within our community very often don't have a critical feedback loop. And you know what? Who's to say that if people wouldn't have been more honest with her going forward, if she hadn't sought opinions, if she hadn't taken the steps to do so, the work would have been better. It would have reflected at least an honest intention. What came across is like I said when we were talking about the Getdown. If I was to write a story about the South Bronx, it would ring false. You know why? Because I'm looking at it as an outsider, and so was she. And then I'm inventing a language. I'm inventing an experience. I'm inventing a plot line which goes into tropes, to be honest with you, when you're not speaking from a place of truth, you know, or when you're not even applying your own truth to somebody else's storyline. I could write a story of my childhood, believe it or not, in Barranquilla, where I was, you know, where we were like in el barrio, and the kids that I knew there, and some of them were, you know, like guns a little too much, and the other one was pimping his ass, and whatever was happening, and that you know what, and I could speak honestly to it, even though I don't look like I come from the community, because I lived that. So for her, I think it is important that she gets critical feedback, and I'm sure it is painful. But you know what? This is where we have to talk to the industry side of things. Put on your big girl pants, take the friggin', you know, take the lumps, and get better. I have a real hard time with people that are gonna go cry in a corner. Get the fuck up, get back at your desk, and do it right this time, and issue the friggin' apology, because it's owed and it's right.
Two things that I
also at the table, but
two things that I want to say here. My understanding is, because you guys know I'm a young adult novelist, for those who are not watching who don't know that, I'm a young adult novelist, and my understanding is that advance review copies went to African American authors who told them, do not publish this book, and they were ignored. And again, a lot of the reviews that laud this were coming from white reviewers. And meanwhile, if you go back and you look at those reviews, there are flags all over the reviews. How do you give something a starred review when in your review you are saying, yeah, there are moments when it veers into stereotype? So how do you give it 4 reviews? So there's something about whose critique is being valued. Because they were told, don't publish this. This is problematic. Do not publish this. And those voices were not heeded. So that is the one thing. And the other thing is, too, that comes up a lot, too, is, you know, I understand how when we talk about, people are concerned about talking about an artist's intention, because they're like, well, first of all, we should focus on impact. And we should focus on impact because intention is how some people try to escape accountability. Well, I'm a good person, and I meant well. So I understand why people don't want to focus on intention. But here's what I'm really struggling with this particular instance, is that we all want to be identified with our intentions when we get it right. When we nail it and we're getting praised and we're being lauded, yeah, I meant to do that. But when we make a really egregious error and we hurt and we offend, then we want to hide behind, but I'm a good person, that wasn't my intention. One thing that I want to say about, and I don't know the author personally, one thing that the author has said is that, you know, she had traveled doing workshops with African American teenagers, and I'm guessing that from that, and I see you, Siri, going, I'm guessing from that, she felt that she had done her due diligence by having these experiences. But the problem is that just the very fact that you felt the need to invent a vernacular when it already exists. You're writing urban realism. I have to say it, and there's a hubris there. There's a hubris there where you feel the need to invent something when what already exists is magical and powerful and masterful. So what's that about? We have to interrogate that. We have to look at that and ask that difficult question.
Can I jump in?
Yes, Linda, please.
So I'm feeling, I don't know the woman, I don't know too much about it. I just know what you shared with us. I'm having a tough time. I'm very torn because as a writer, you can make mistakes. You're growing. you don't, out of the gate, you don't know exactly what you're doing. You know, you're learning as you go. But I want to actually talk about constructive feedback, because we all talk about this in our own communities. And how do we approach these things that happen with art, all these creative endeavors, in a way where how do we approach the artist in a way that doesn't hurt them, without the bullying, without the, oh my God, they should have known better, because there's so much work that goes into a book, there's so much work that goes into a movie, that I just hate myself when something is so bad and I want to say something. And lots of times I do say some things. But I see it in our community, where I see, and listen, people could say the same thing about my work, but I see stuff that could be better. I see stuff that's stereotypical. I see stuff that's just subpar. I mean, and maybe that's me. Everybody has their audience. Maybe I should just shut up. So I guess I'm struggling with just even this issue, is that as a community, do we have to, are we obligated to tell people what we feel, or should we just shut up and let people grow? I mean, there's a fine line.
How do they grow if we don't give them feedback?
I just looked up something, so I'm doing a little bit, like as we're chatting, I'm doing a little bit of research on the author, and what I learned about her is that her background is actually in film and web series and short films, and so she's only published 3 novels, and I think 3 novels is you know, very early, or could be, I think, very early in a writer's career, right? So we're talking about room for growth. We're talking about some of the mistakes. I mean, obviously, we haven't read her other books to know, you know, what kind of writer she is, and if this particular novel was, you know, an adventure that she decided to take as a writer. So what I'm seeing is I'm seeing what appears to be someone who's transitioning from, you know, a background in film and directing to becoming a writer. Right, and not that's I'm not trying to justify what she did in the novel, but you know, but there's sort of a fine line, I think, between what Linda is saying in terms of like how do writers have the space to grow, and with what Sophia is saying is, you know, how do we provide criticism that is valuable to the writer, but also, you know, where the writer can then grow from that too. And I think, you know, Sophia's point earlier about the fact that she hasn't come out to speak out on it says a lot, right? Maybe she's still reflecting on it, I hope, you know, right? I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. You know, right, so there might be contract, right, things, you know, in terms of her publishing contract and what she can say, and now if they're not going to publish the book, there might be, you know, other things that are going on for her. You know, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, because here's
go ahead.
I have to say this because if this would have been a white author, or we would not be being so sensitive. And I'm not saying, you know, and I want to say, like, I think the reason why we're being sensitive is because number one, we're artists, and we want to know, well, we know we're capable of making mistakes, and we want to, like, okay, and when we see someone in our own community get it wrong, we're hoping, like, well, since I know I'm not perfect and I could get it wrong, how do I want to be treated in this engagement? And also to acknowledge the power differential, right? Because, you know, white folks can make this mistake all day and still live to do it, and they also tend to not want to hear the critique. They also tend to be like, well, I know that I meant well, and I don't whatever, and their power and their privilege allows them to do that, to not engage in critique.
Right,
so
right.
It is different in that way. But I have to say, like, okay, another thing that the author has said in an interview, which is very, very troubling to me, is that in so many what she was doing in this book had not been done in YA before. What that tells me is that here you are depicting, writing a YA novel that depicts African American young people and you have not read African American authors in your own genre and in your own subgenre, that is a problem. And that has to be called out, and there is no excuses for that. And that, again, that is something that if a white person does, we will be all over, and rightfully so. So I just think that when it comes to other people of color, maybe we do pull back because we can see ourselves in them, and we also pull back because we make an assumption of solidarity that we don't make with white people, with white artists. With white artists, we see them, you could tell any story in the world, and you want to tell our story, so you're really not here for us. Right? But when it comes to a person of color, we want to make the assumption that they are here for us even when they get it wrong. But I submit that if you really are here for us, what solidarity looks like is you come into the conversation, you reflect deeply, you engage the critique, and I really do feel the book needs to be pulled. That's where I'm at. That's for me what solidarity looks like from the Latino community here. Because the African American community is deeply hurt by this book.
I'm going to make another point also, just going back to the industry side of things. What the industry is going to see is if we continue to have this very thin-skinned attitude about our work, it shows that we haven't gone through the process. Writers work years on finding their voice, on finding those characters. And I've seen this in Latino writers, I've seen this in white writers. They beg people to read their stuff. I've got one friend who happens to be white, and she's like, she sends 25, she's like, just read my 25 pages. She sends it out to like 10 people. But she hammers on because the critical feedback is necessary, and you need to search for it, and you need to be very thick-skinned about it, because honestly, when you get to the industry side of things, what matters is that you're an artist that knows the process, that can take critical feedback, that can work with that can improve their art form, and that honestly is sellable. So the only thing that's what people are gonna remember about this on the industry side for this author is that her book got pulled. Is that a lot of people spent a lot of money publishing a lot of stuff and it had to get pulled. So somewhere along the line, the due diligence was not met and it wasn't done right, and money was lost.
See, I think that I'm so in the middle about everything.
It's complex.
Because without the internet, that book would have came out and failed. And I think everybody deserves a chance to fail.
I don't know if the book would have failed.
What?
I don't know if the book would have failed.
You don't think her book would have failed?
There are so many people who read those reviews. Definitely go look at the blog posts by white librarians and white teachers who, based on the strength of the reviews, ordered this book. And only now, because of the pushback by people of color, primarily African Americans, who said this book is a problem, have taken a step back and realized, oh my God, I got this wrong. I ordered this book from my library. I was going to, of all the stories that I could have brought to my classroom, I was going to bring this book. And I got it wrong. And some folks are being, I appreciate that some folks are being very publicly reflective, because they could always, again, hide in the corner and be like, oh shit, I bought this book for my classroom. I got 50 copies sitting over here. What do I do now? I really missed the boat on this. The initial reviews show, see, people don't know what they don't know. They don't interrogate. They don't interrogate their ability to evaluate this kind of material.
There was one review, or it was maybe like a second review that was one of the ones that we looked at, by Pernille Rip, and she talks about, she appears white. She's a teacher, author, creator, speaker. And she talks about first having read it and loving it and writing about it and sharing, all of this praise for the book. And then she actually read Jennifer Baker's review, which Jennifer has joined us, and thank you so much for being with us. And that is what made her rethink her initial praise for the novel. And she talks about that, and she's extremely reflective in her review in terms of like her original thoughts versus now looking at it through this other lens and sort of jumping the gun on some things. And so I really appreciated that. But when you guys have a chance, go on Goodreads. And on Goodreads, you will see very clearly who's like, oh my God, this book is so amazing. And
it's so
who's
authentic.
like,
How do you know?
Right, you know, right. So I think that sort of even like the Goodreads critiques also are very telling in terms of, you know, who's saying, oh, this book's amazing. We've never read anything like this before. And maybe partly it's amazing because people are appreciating that she tried to create this new vernacular, or that she wrote it in the style that she wrote it, and you know that may be part of it. But you know, but I think that I think that we are seeing, and the thing is that, you know, when someone outside, for example, if I read a book by someone, I'm trusting that they're giving me some truth, right? Unless I know better, unless I think better. I'm trusting that they are providing me with something that's real and makes sense. Unfortunately, that's not what happened here. I know, like, you know, Memoirs of a Geisha kind of had a similar thing where, you know, some people were like, oh my God, this book is amazing, this book is fabulous, I've never read anything like this, I was addicted to the last page. And then other people were like, whoa, 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 you know, this book is problematic. So I think it's okay. I mean, I'm okay with being, you know, like with being in this place. I'm okay with finding the book problematic. I think it's important that the conversation happens, because I think that, well, I don't know if Charlton-Trujillo is growing, but I know we are growing from having this conversation. I think as artists, as people who write for audiences, I mean, I know we write for ourselves, but we also write for audiences. And if and when she joins the conversation, then hopefully it can be a real one. And I you know, and I understand you, Linda, where you're coming from, because you too are a writer and you've published a lot, and you know, your perspective is you know, your perspective is important in honoring, like, where, you know, where the writer is, right? You know, I think that we need to explore that as well.
I also, you know, one of the things I'm going to challenge myself, Linda, based on you. Okay, what if this was her attempt to do A Clockwork Orange, right? And was purposely inventing this, and all of a sudden the Brits got out an advance copy. They're like, are you fucking kidding me with the violence, right? This is not who we are, and they're talking about it from their perspective. You're not, you know, this is... But then I'm going to go back to the industry thing. As an artist, you have to be able to then say, this was my intention. This was the artist's mission. This is my vision, for better or for worse. This is what I am putting into the world. This is my take on something. You have to be able to do it, and you have to be able to back it up. Because honestly, in the void of that, what you have is I don't even know if she was trying for a new art form.
Well, the thing too with intention is that to me is coupled with the critical feedback, which is that if you have an intention, I think as a writer, then you need that critical feedback to make sure that your intention, you know, is clear, and that your message is clear, right? So I think, you know, if she's writing in a vacuum and she's using a few workshops that she did, you know, with a few groups of African American kids as the basis for telling this story.
Good.
Say again, Linda?
Nobody's that good.
Yeah, right? Because I have 3 experiences with African-American kids, and like now I can write their life story. And I think that might be part, I mean, I don't know how much people know about that or her experiences. I mean, I've been teaching black and brown kids for 15 years. I still don't know that I know their stories that well. You know, like I would always think, you know, what am I missing? What's here? And so then, but then that's also a privilege thing, right? And you know, it's the idea that she felt that she could write this story, right, in her vacuum, whatever her good intentions might have been. You know, that's a real place of privilege, knowing that if Theo tried to write his own story, you know, and maybe that story would get told, maybe it wouldn't.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I don't have the statistics here. I know Katie Horning did a wonderful presentation for School Library Journal about diverse voices and who gets to tell what stories. And I don't have the figures, but there has been a spike in books geared towards children and young adults that have African American protagonists a lot of them are not being written by African Americans. So again, thank you for talking about privilege, because again, this goes back to, we're talking about the Getdown. There was an assumption here, like, someone outside this experience finds a value in the story, so they must be tapping into a humanity. Let them tell that story. And what is the impact of this being on African Americans who want to tell these stories themselves? That is an issue. That is an issue. And again, I want to reiterate that, and whose critical feedback is being valued, because the book was written, the book was shared before it was published, and they were told by people from the community depicted, this is a problem, do not publish this. And they were completely ignored, and they barreled through when the white critics applauded this material. So I really do appreciate all the things that we're bringing up in terms of the general broad strokes, but then we have a very particular case study here. There's particulars here that can't be ignored. And so this is just, we're at 12:05. This is just the beginning of the conversation. I want to thank all of you for being willing to have this conversation publicly, because it is a very complex and difficult conversation. And I feel that because the author is Latina, it was important for Latinos in media to take on this conversation, as difficult and as painful as it can be. But I really do believe that before we can begin to grow and move and progress, there has to be accountability. And so far, I want to see the author take responsibility for what she has created, and then we can move from there. So I'm hoping that her silence is about deep listening and reflection, and that we will hear from her soon, and that the conversation continues. Any last minutes before we, last comments about either topic before we move on? Everybody, go to Latinas Chat Media on Facebook. Use Latinas Chat Media hashtag on Twitter, so we can keep the conversation going, because this is not the end of it. We're only beginning to tap onto, again, for me, I'm always coming from what does solidarity look like here? And I just know, for me, I have fucked up in my depictions. I have. And what I would want, and yes, I'm not going to lie, I would want my essential goodness not to be questioned, not to be called to question, but I also prove that by being willing to engage the critique. And willing to go where I fuck up. And if I know that I hurt people, that it is my intention to be in solidarity, I want to know, and I want to listen, as painful as it might be.
Yeah.
But there's also one thing we should be very careful about, is when we allow many people to tell us what is right and wrong.
Right.
I'm proud to be a rebel. You know, and I will fall on my face and learn my way. But I agree with you. Certain things that people might find offensive, those are things in books and movies that people should be able to be open to. But we have to be careful that that doesn't cross over. Like, the internet has become this huge voice that's telling, it's stopping people from being creative. It's telling, it's actually, you know, I see things that are very popular that I don't find interesting at all. So that becomes the it thing, but I do not find it, doesn't fulfill me in any way. The internet is a scary place for, you know, for artists. And I think we have to be careful that we keep that part of us, you know. Again, I'm very torn by all of this, because she's Latina too.
Well, I think there's a difference between, like, pulling someone to the side and saying, hey girl, we got to talk about this book, right? We have to talk about what's happening here, versus you know, being out to destroy something. You know, and I think that's sort of like the fine line of what the internet does, right? People are, you know, not everyone, but some people, you know, want to destroy things, right? And it's being done in a very public kind of way, you know, versus, you know, so you know, I guess the question that I would leave us with, which I'm not sure about, is prior to the blogs that were posted, right? When this was still, I guess, sort of behind closed doors, and when publishers were getting the response, you know, that's a place of question for me, right? At what point did an editor or did someone reading, maybe never, you know, say, look, this has real problems. Maybe this needs a lot of heavy editing before we try to publish it again, or before we try to put this book out. And so, you know, so that to me is sort of that, because then is it about caring? Do we really, I guess the question is, do we really care about this author and her ability to grow and become a great writer? Or, you know, are we, and I think this might be Linda's question too, or are we just telling her, no, you can't write this, bye, you know?
I don't think we're doing that either.
No, I don't think so either. But
it could turn into that in another case.
Well,
right.
Well, here's the thing. One thing that I do feel like I need to say, and maybe this is something to do with the difference in the publishing industry as opposed to the TV and film industry. I have yet to see a critique of this book that has attacked the author. A lot of the critiques that I have seen have really drilled down on the work. Good. What makes this complicated? What makes this complicated is the fact that the line is blurred between artists and creation, and that's very difficult. But I do want to say, and again, maybe this is a reflection of the publishing industry gets down a little differently than TV and film. I have yet to see people been very thoughtful, very reflective, even if they've been strident in their critiques. I have not seen any attacks on Charlton-Trujillo. They've really been, but they have been no holds barred, as they should be, about the work. So this could be a possible model for how we have these conversations. What is happening here, the way that Edie Campbell has written about it, the way that Jennifer Baker has written about it, the way Zetta Elliott has written about it. You know, again, a lot of people, they're engaging the work itself and linking the work to the larger structural problems. So I do want to say that. So, and folks can go out there and also, I also feel that there's been good examples of allyship from white folks in this scenario. People who are being reflective and again, publicly, like, calling themselves out about their initial reaction to the book now that the critique has come out. So I do think that's I do think that's important to say, and I do think, again, the conversation is just beginning. So let's continue it, because it's 12:11. And
can I just jump in really quickly?
Yes.
I was just going to say my final thoughts are I definitely think that the artist failed in her due diligence in putting forth what her vision for this book was. And in the absence of that vision, the void was filled by other people's opinions. And that's just due diligence on the industry side. You can, whatever way you want to do it, the conversation.
She didn't fail alone.
But she had an editor, right? There's, you know, come on.
She didn't fail alone. A lot of people also failed her. But I do want to say, because Siri, you brought something, and I'm thinking about it now, and maybe I'll change my mind in the future, but right now my position on the whole thing, yes, I want her to grow, but I don't feel that her growth trumps the harm that has been done by the African American community.
And that's
because this was a long process, and there were flags on the play all along the way, and nobody gave a shit, or nobody gave enough of a shit.
And I want to make a final. I want to do just say a final thought on solidarity and what this whole conversation means to me. To me, the solidarity is in that we stopped it before it became like, oh, she's wonderful, she's it, and in the absence of critical feedback, that's the one that gets the movie deal. And then that's the one that gets distributed past just the publishing world. And then that becomes the benchmark. Solidarity is, if something is problematic to us, we stopped it before it grew. We didn't let the cancer spread. Now, we were wrong, maybe it wasn't cancer, maybe it was benign, but it was problematic and it had to happen. And I'm glad it didn't get to be, you know, so we're not the film as well. It would have been.
So on that note, let's end the chat here, but let's continue the conversation. You can follow all of us on Twitter. We also, our Twitter handles for Latinas Chat Media is actually at Latinas in Media. Let's continue the conversation at the Latinas Chat Media Facebook page, because this is only the beginning, and this can be growing pains. This can be, if we're willing to sit in the fire with each other and ask the hard questions and to come to this with the desire to be better for ourselves and each other, then this can be, then this very painful experience can actually be a good thing. So thank you for everybody who's been hanging out with us,
Yes,
who's giving us feedback.
Thank you.
Let's keep the conversation going. Until the next one, have a fantastic weekend. I love you three. I appreciate you three and everybody who's watching.
Shout out to everybody who joined us on the chat. Jennifer Baker, Monique Phillips, Evelyn Vito, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Maria Sonia Gonzalez, thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
all right, guys, take care.
Goodbye.
Have a good one.
Hasta pronto.